Hi, welcome to Special Edition Education Matters. We're talking about the reopening of our schools, finding a new normal in public education in New Jersey. With me is Dr. Mathew Murphy from the Ramsey School District up in Bergen County. Welcome, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Ray, for having me on.
Always a pleasure. The last time we talked, you were just dealing with the closing of the schools. And I remember you said to me, your biggest worry is that we were going to try to reopen too early in June, and that would have been almost impossible at that point. Does it seem any easier now that we're looking at reopening in September?
Actually, no, it's unbelievably, it's even more difficult to imagine. There are so many parameters out there, and there's so many things we need to consider, the health and safety of our students and our staff. So what I thought was going to be a quiet summer in which we can come back with a fresh start in September of 2020 is actually more complicated than I would ever imagined.
I would have to agree. The Department of Ed and the governor put out guidelines in June. One of the things that they put in there, though, was you needed to have a pretty good community committee to look at all this infrastructure. Did you do something along that line? Who was on it and how did it work?
Yeah, sure. I thought that was a great idea from the governor and the DOE. So we have 5 buildings. So we have our pandemic teams, which are made up of staff, parents, and administrators. And then we have the restart committee. So we have 60 plus people working on these issues. And they all have been fabulous, sharing wonderful ideas back and forth. And, you know, one of the things that we value here in Ramsey is being creative, being collaborative. And that's what we're doing. We're working together to solve a very muddy problem.
So there are 3 basic solutions out there. One, so in-person education with social distancing protocols, completely virtual, which we ended the year in, and then a hybrid model where you might do a little bit of both, which is becoming more and more likely as we go down the road. What are some of the pluses and minuses in your view from these different?
Yeah, there's no replacing schools. I am someone who firmly believes that students learn so much, not just content-wise, but so much of how to be a wonderful young adult in schools. And that starts very early on with a strong pre-K program. So ideally, I would love to go back to the normal where everyone is back and this COVID was like a fuzzy dream, / nightmare. But it can't happen. And in Ramsey, while we have wonderful facilities, we just don't have enough space to bring everyone back and distance appropriately. So bringing everyone back was not an option in Ramsey. I spoke to the Ramsey Board of Health. We're one of the few towns up north that has its own Board of Health. And he agreed that he would not feel confident that we could bring everyone back in September. And if you look at the data from the state and national news, while New Jersey was trending down, unfortunately, I see that trend going up. So I think that was a good call by the Ramsey Board of Health.
And what's I had another superintendent talk to me. He said the hybrid is going to be very difficult to pull off. Just trying to do 2 different lessons for different students. Do you kind of concur with that?
Yeah, so you want to bring the students back for as much live teaching as possible, but that comes at the expense because in Ramsey, we'll probably move to an A-B day, and we're going to ask teachers to really extend themselves because you'll be teaching 2 separate groups of children. You don't get to build that community that is so important to teaching and learning, as you know, Ray. And then keeping on track of those students who opt out for a virtual option will make it even more difficult. So a hybrid solution is what I think most of us will go to, but boy, it has its challenges.
Yeah, one of the concerns I had, you mentioned the community. There's a community within each classroom. And it takes a while for the teacher and the students to get to know each other, to build that relationship. One of the concerns I have is we went remote in March, but they had spent that whole year building a relationship. A little harder for a teacher to establish that relationship, I would think anyway, remotely with the students, and maybe even in the social distancing parameters. Is that a concern that you would?
Without a doubt, and people think as you get older, it's not important. I would suggest that it's probably equally important to have that community in our upper grades and our high school. I see firsthand how our high school teachers really act as pseudo parents and guidance and so forth. So you're right, it's going to take a bit longer. That's why we are trying to bring them back for some in live teaching on a smaller scale, but it'll take a lot longer, and it will make us think out of the box how to create that dynamic, because you're never going to have your A day and B day kids together. So how do you foster that sense of relationship?
And there's a lot of little things, and they're not little, they're all big. But one of them, I was a little surprised that masks were not required for students. How is your district addressing that?
We are requiring masks of our staff and of our students. Of course, there will be exceptions for medical and disabled children. And there'll be a new lexicon, the mask break, right? So we know from best practice that children need to move. They need to have that kinesthetic experience, and our staff know that, and they do a great job. But now we're going to have to recognize that it's very difficult to ask a 7-year-old to keep a mask on for 4 hours a day. So the whole concept of a mask break will come into play. And truthfully, I have no doubt that a great elementary school teacher will make a song, a haiku, a YouTube video, something that will go viral on how mask breaks can occur in our schools. Our teachers are very creative.
I think we've seen that with just when we went virtual. The other concern a lot of educators had, and the students maybe most concerned about, is the special ed population, because that instruction is very hard to do remotely. Some might even say impossible. So how are you trying to deal with that?
That's a great question. We believe equity is a huge issue. That's one of our 4 pillars here in Ramsey that props up our pyramid. And we're looking at it from an equity perspective. So our most vulnerable kids in special education or not, could be our English language learners, will probably get more in live instruction than others. Of course, we'll keep in mind their medical needs, but I envision that our most vulnerable students will get more live instruction than, say, others. And I'm okay with that, because that is what they need to be successful. We're one of the few districts in the North that had an extended year program this summer live. And it's because we believe that our most vulnerable kids need to be in school. They need to have that social interaction. It also helps the families. I had families that since March haven't been out of the house in 2 months, didn't have a break. And so for us to provide extended school year, and we've done it beautifully, thanks to my director of special services, it provides the family a little 3-hour break as well. And you should see the smiles and the joy on the faces of our students when they came back to see their friends. So we're going to do as much as we can to bring our most vulnerable students back, as long as our staff and they are safe.
You mentioned that you're trying to bring the kids into school, and we have those social distancing protocols, which are hard enough within a classroom. But there are other times, the school bus, the lunch break, or maybe moving in high school, moving from class to class. You're trying to deal with those. I know you were early in this process, but
we are. We're trying to eliminate as many hallway passes as we can, so we can just limit the amount of time the students are moving around the room, around the school. So that might look like in the elementary schools that the specials go into the homeroom, music goes into the classroom, art goes into the classroom so they don't have to move. Same thing in our high school, that if the teacher can go into the classroom, that would be better. But as you know, Ray, in a high school such as ours, most of our classes are multi-grade. So you could have a 10th grader and 11th grader in the same class for period 2. And then period 3, it's a whole new mixture. So we're going to extend the hallway passing time. We're going to stagger them as well, as best as we can, I should say. In terms of busing, we're lucky because Ramsey is not a big busing community. You know, we're only a few square miles. We have 3,000 kids, but it's not a big geographic location. So we have a few buses that run, and I would imagine that from the feedback that I'm getting unofficially, a lot of the parents are going to drive their kids. So I'm not as concerned about busing as compared to some of my colleagues who have big districts that are almost 100% busing.
Yeah. The other concern, and did you survey your parents and staff?
Not yet. This week, our survey is going out.
But have you heard from parents and or staff members who are a little concerned about coming back for a variety of reasons? Maybe a staff member that has an underlying condition. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I anticipate across the state that the number of students and staff who don't come back are going to be very high. That's why, in my estimation only, I think we're going to have to move to a full virtual model, only because staffing is going to be a huge issue. And I get it, right? You have 3 tiers of staff members. One, the CDC model that meet the criteria over the age 65, medical conditions. Then you have just very real family medical leave type of FMLA. My husband is a first responder. I have all my family lives in Ohio who are going to take care of my 3-year-old and 5-year-olds. We're working hard with local daycare to help our staff out, but I don't know if that will be enough. And then you have that 3rd tier of the staff member who is just really worried. They may not fall in the CDC category. They may not have child care issues, but they're, for whatever legit reason, worried about coming back. And I get it. I get it. And I've already reached out to my association, and we're going to do everything in Ramsey to make our staff whole as much as possible.
One of the things if we come back in person and I guess even if we come back remotely, you do need to assess where your students are academically, but also social emotionally. And I know that's been a big, mental wellness is a big forte of yours. How are you going to try to, is that a priority when you come back?
It is. SEL, as you know, is dear to my heart. I've said this before on other broadcasts together. I don't think there's a bigger single issue facing our communities, and I don't care if it's rural, suburban, or urban, than mental health. Our country has to change our approach to the mental health, what I call epidemic, going on in around. We have to have greater access to healthcare. We have to destigmatize those who have an illness. We have to be more agile in getting families and their children help immediately. The backlog is astonishing to see a therapist or a counselor. And we've done that, as you know, in Ramsey. We now have full-time therapists 12 months a year now available to our communities and our staff. I have a warm line. So we're there. We've adopted Mark Brackett's work out of Yale called The Ruler, which is a very research-based social and emotional learning. So that will go on, and we have dedicated staff to do that. And I think we have to continually assess not just our students, but our staff and our parents on their emotional wellness, because these are very difficult times. I think the last time we spoke, I shared with you, I think this can create the greatest mental health problem for years to come. And I'm seeing it percolate in social media and just talking to my community. So it is going to be the number one priority when we come back, which is to make sure our staff, our parents, and our kids are healthy.
We're coming towards the close. What do you see as the biggest obstacle or challenge that maybe we haven't discussed yet that you're thinking about all the time?
Well, I don't want to get too political, but I do think we have to put politics aside when we're talking about COVID. And whether or not you're on the left or the right politically, I think we have to realize there are no great choices in coming up to September. There just aren't. We are all going to face some real harsh realities that none of us are going to like what school will look like come September. However, we need to rally together as a communities, to say this might not be the ideal, but how can we work together? And that's what I would like to see more leadership through the state and down to local school districts of, okay, this is our reality, but how can we work together to come out of this stronger? And I think that's something that leadership really needs to address.
Okay, I'd like to thank you. And thank Dr. Mathew Murphy from the Ramsey School District. I think we had some good thoughts. Good luck with your challenge. I know you and your staff will be working very hard to service the children and the community of Ramsey.
Thank you, Ray.
Okay, and that brings us to the end of this special edition of Education Matters. I hope you enjoyed it.